Welcome everybody to First Minister's Question Time,
Next Generation.
Brought to you by Children in Scotland and YouthLink Scotland, who have been working with children and young people themselves right across Scotland to put on this event. This is my lovely co-host Rosanna Hussain. Rosanna is an I Will Ambassador for Scotland, was chair of the Young Scot Awards judging panel, and is a fabulous young leader who's come all the way from Alness in the Highlands.
Thank you so much, John, for that lovely introduction. This is my co-host, John Loughton. John has been a youth campaigner since he was 11 years old, and he's also a social entrepreneur and motivational speaker. And he's a former chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament, and he also won Celebrity Big Brother in 2008. Now, please give a warm welcome to the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon.
Big round of applause for the First Minister. First Minister, thank you very, very much for joining the children and young people of Scotland today.
You're welcome. I'm very excited, if a little bit nervous.
And can we ask you, what does a First Minister do over your Easter break?
Well, this was quite a busy Easter break, actually, because in the first part of it, we were still trying to grapple with all the Brexit issues, and we were still worried we might crash out of the EU with no deal. And then I have spent the other half of it catching up on other stuff, and I've got my party conference this weekend coming, so it's been quite busy, but because the weather was lovely, I got to spend some of it at least sitting in the garden while I did all that work.
Oh, good.
That's lovely. So without further ado, we're going to get on to our questions. Are you ready, First Minister?
As ready as I will ever be.
So we have our first question from Erin, who is with Haggai.
What is the Scottish Government doing to prevent climate change? Most people think it's not their job or it's too late to prevent global warming, which is a lie. If more politicians back environmental change, then a big difference could happen.
Great question, Erin. And firstly, I agree with you, it's not too late to tackle climate change, and we should never think it is. And it's everybody's job. It's my job as First Minister, it's every politician's job everywhere in the world, and it's the job of everybody across the country and every country. The Scottish Government is already seen as one of the countries that leads the world. So we have already almost halved our emissions, the emissions that cause climate change. And we're about to set a new target that will see us increase that ambition even more. And already we are committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. But we're waiting on some advice just now, which we should get next week, which hopefully will say that we can go a bit further than that and aim to be net zero of all greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So if we do that, then Scotland will continue to be one of the countries in the world that is showing most ambition around this. And that's really important. But my last point would be, governments can set targets and governments should set targets. But if we are to meet these targets, we all have to think about how we live. We all have to think about our own impact on the environment. And I think it is fantastic that young people have really taken the lead here and are forcing adults, people like me, to think much more seriously about how we make a positive change in our everyday lives, and that is vitally important. So keep putting that pressure on.
And how do you feel about that answer?
I think that's satisfactory.
Okay, thank you.
It's interesting, First Minister, you're talking about it's something we all have to be part of, and we have a supplementary question on this from Aaron from Cowdenbeath Academy, who has a question about one of the ways he thinks we could help to tackle climate change.
We should stop making plastic fork, knives and spoons, and we can make reusable stuff, because if we're making plastic, that's just ruining our environment.
So do you think we should cancel them?
Well, I think we should be much tougher on single-use plastic. We should avoid using plastics that we don't need to use, and we should do more to recycle. Most of the letters I get from young people these days, and I get quite a lot of letters from school pupils like yourselves. Most of them these days are about this very topic, about how we cut down on plastic pollution. We are looking to ban certain single-use plastic items, like these cotton buds that you get. We're looking at a levy on things like disposable coffee cups. I've just come from a meeting of the Scottish Cabinet this morning, and we were looking there at the detail of the deposit return scheme that we are about to introduce, which is a scheme that if you buy a bottle of juice a plastic bottle of juice in a shop, then you'll pay a deposit of a small amount that you'll get back if you take the bottle back, so that it can then be recycled. So there's lots we're doing there to try to cut down. Everybody's concerned about plastics, particularly in our seas, and we need to cut down as far as possible on the plastics we use, but then recycle more of the ones that are unavoidable.
Does that answer your question, Adam? What do you think of that?
Yeah, that answers my question.
Thank you very much for your question. First Minister, there's been a lot of young people taking to the streets and protesting recently in Scotland and across the UK and the world. What do you think as a leader of a country when you see these young people raising their voices?
I feel very proud because I want to live in a country, let alone be the First Minister of a country where young people, first of all, care about the world that they're living in and want to make a difference. And secondly, that they feel their voices can be heard. I think that is a fantastic thing. I met with some of the young people that have been leading the school strike movement. Now, obviously, as First Minister, I'm not advocating that people don't go to school. But that said, taking a bit of time out of school occasionally to learn more about the environment and to protest about the environment is actually helping to educate responsible citizens. And that's what we want our schools to be doing. So I wish young people didn't feel as if they had to protest to make adults do the right thing, but I'm proud that our young people care enough to do that. And as adults, we've really got to step up to the mark.
Thank you so much, First Minister.
Does anybody have any questions or points they'd like to make on climate change to the First Minister? Did anyone go on the protests themselves? You were all at school. Do you feel like teachers are in the rooms who are being nice and well behaved? Very good. Okay, thank you very much for that. First Minister, now you'd be surprised to hear there was a lot of questions coming in about a wee thing called Brexit.
Oh,
I don't know if you come across it, First Minister.
I've heard about it, yeah.
So it's come up question 2 of today's FMQT Next Generation. It's still going on, as we all know, and young people often feel like, what's happening? And sometimes it's important.
Adults often feel like, what's happening?
So it's really interesting this topic's come up, and we've got a question on Brexit, First Minister, from the pupils of Inver Primary School in the Highlands. So we have Molly, who would like to ask you about Brexit.
What implications will Brexit have on the lives and education of children and young people in Scotland?
That's a brilliant question, Molly, and obviously we don't really know yet what's going to happen with Brexit. We were meant to be out of the European Union by now, but thankfully we're not, so there's still a chance we won't ever leave, and I hope we can try and seize that opportunity. But if Brexit goes ahead, then I don't think it's good for young people. The European Union is not perfect. It's got lots of imperfections and flaws, and like any institution, any government in a country, it will take decisions that some people don't agree with. But the European Union has meant that all of us in our lifetimes have been able to travel across Europe without any real barriers in place. Young people have been able to go and study in other European countries. Many European people from other European countries come to study in our country. We learn more about other countries, and that helps to keep peace between countries. And so I think it's been a really good thing. And I think it would be a shame if the opportunities of the next generation were restricted by us not being in the European Union. And that's before we talk about all of the economic implications of it. So I hope we get to stay. I hope the UK stays. And if the UK is intent on leaving, then I hope one day Scotland will be able to be in the European Union as an independent country.
And First Minister, just following up on that, a lot of youth workers around Scotland have said that they feel uninformed about Brexit when they're talking to young people. How do you feel about that?
I can understand that. I think a lot of people feel very uninformed. I mean, I think back to, it's almost 3 years now since the vote on Brexit took place, and in advance of that vote, there was actually very little information that told people what would happen if we voted to leave the EU. And some of that information that was put forward has turned out not to have been true. I don't know if all of you remember, they put this slogan on the side of a bus that said there would be all this extra money for the National Health Service if we voted to leave. So there was a lot of misinformation and there was a lack of good information. And it's become even more confused since then. So I'm not surprised that people feel confused, and that's been part of the problem. I don't agree with Brexit, but it could have been handled a lot better if people had been clear and honest at the outset about what it meant and then put a plan in place to deliver it, and that didn't happen.
But is there a challenge as well for the Scottish Government, your government that you run, even though Brexit is a devolved issue in Westminster, young people themselves in Strathclyde University in the Respect Me campaign have said over 3/4 of young people have experienced xenophobia or racism, and lots of people, over half, have said that's went up since Brexit. You do have powers to help tackle bullying and hate crimes and stuff like that after Brexit. Is your government doing enough?
Well, I always think government should never sit back and be complacent about the need to tackle racism and xenophobia and bullying. I think we should always be looking to do more. So I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, I think we're doing enough and that's an end to it. But we've worked really hard on this. I am absolutely passionate in my belief that Scotland is a place where people should feel safe and secure and welcome, regardless of where they come from. If you choose to live in Scotland, then as far as I'm concerned, you're Scottish. Whether you were born here and 3 generations of your family were born here, or whether you've only lived here for a few months, if this is your home, it should feel like your home and you should feel welcome. So we've gone out of our way and will continue to say to people living here from other European countries that they're welcome. We want people here. We want people to stay here. We've tried to provide some practical support to people going through a really tough time. Just earlier this week, we extended free tuition to European nationals for another period, even if we're out of the EU. So we need to do all of that. And, at the era we live in just now, it becomes all the more important for all of us to stand up against racism and xenophobia. There are too many politicians, even in the UK, who seek to try to exploit people's fears, when in actual fact we should be doing more to bring people together. And I take that responsibility as First Minister really seriously.
And it's fair to say you support staying in the EU, and you support a second referendum on the EU?
I think a second referendum on the EU would be probably the best thing to break the deadlock, because nobody has been able to break it in any other way. 3 years on is what is happening now really what anybody expected when they voted. So I think that would be the way forward. It's not necessarily the ideal solution for Scotland, because after all, we voted to stay the first time round and we've been ignored. So we could vote to stay all over again and still be outvoted and ignored. But I'm willing to give that a go if it gives us the chance of staying in the EU. But one of the things that's been interesting over the last couple of years is, watching the meeting of the EU a couple of weeks ago when they decided to extend the UK's membership for 6 months. There were 27 countries sitting around that table. The UK was locked out of the room. About a dozen of those countries were smaller than or similar in size to Scotland. And yet we have no influence right now around that table. If we were in there as an independent country, we'd have a lot more influence over our own future than we do right now. Because these countries, like Ireland's been defended every step of the way by the EU, while Scotland's voice has been ignored by Westminster. So the lesson, everybody knows I support independence, but the lesson of this for me is, do we really want in the future to be a kind of marginalised part of a UK that is marginalising itself in Europe, or do we want actually to be at the top table on a basis of equality with other countries, having some influence over our own future? And I know which one I'd prefer.
It's interesting. I think a question about independence for Scotland is very topical at the minute, and I think you'd be unsurprised to hear it's going to come up in another question in a wee bit as well. But just before we move on to the next question, it'd be interesting to see from this room what people think about Europe and Brexit from what you feel you know. So by show of hands, who feels that they think Scotland and the United Kingdom should stay inside of Europe, the European Union? And who thinks, well, it's a lot of hands, does anyone feel we should leave the European Union? A few. We've got a few. So well done. And so there is some opinions, but I think that stacks up with lots of evidence that young people are kind of pro-Europe. And the last question is, who thinks that either way, whatever happens next, and I think it's fair to say no one really knows, who thinks there should be a second referendum on the European question no matter what? And again, the vast majority of the room. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
So now, on to our next topical question from Angus from Earlston High School.
The SNP may soon be running an independent Scotland. If Brexit goes according to plan, how do you propose to use Scotland's unique position to influence global policy?
Well, I think, as I said a moment ago, Scotland will be best placed to influence global policy if we're actually at the table as an independent country. If we leave the European Union, then we will be locked out of many of these discussions. We were talking about climate change earlier on, and I was talking about how Scotland is a world leader, and we are, and we need to do even more. But Scotland alone can't tackle climate change. We need to be working with other countries to do it collectively. And so many of the big issues that we face today as a planet are issues that we need to work together on. So I believe Scotland should be independent, but not because I want us to be insular. I want us to be independent so we can have a bigger say and work more closely with others. So the Scottish Government, and as long as I'm First Minister, even before we're independent, I will do everything I possibly can to keep Scotland's voice heard. A lot of the world looks to Scotland right now and sees, things that we are doing that really impress them. I talked about climate change. There's the work we've done to tackle period poverty, the minimum unit pricing of alcohol to try and deal with... We lead the world in so many of these policy areas, and we've got to continue to make sure that our voice is heard and that we are having that influence.
How do you feel about the answer?
Pretty good to an extent.
You're a hard audience. Is it a point I didn't cover?
I just wanted to know what your plans were if Scotland became independent and how you would influence global policy. What would you put forward to areas like the UN and organisations that influence global problems?
Yeah. Well, some of what I've talked about, so climate change is right up there at the top, where we need to be doing our bit, but influencing and pressing the world to do more. So even though we're not independent, I've been at the last 3 years, the climate change talks that a couple of years ago led to the Paris Agreement, making sure Scotland's voice is heard. I want to see us do more around equality, tackling poverty globally, women's rights, tackling violence against women. These are all issues where not only do we care about things in Scotland, we've actually got a lot of experience to share with the world. And there'll be other issues as well that come up from time to time that we have a distinctive opinion on and a distinctive expertise to offer.
What do you think an independent Scotland should be pushing as the main agenda globally? Sorry, didn't have that on plan.
To be honest, I think I agree with most of what you said. I think we should mainly be focusing on global climate change because that is a pressing problem, but not many people focus on it because it's not something that's affecting them in the now. But what they fail to see is that it will affect what will happen to people in the future, and that's why it needs to be dealt with now before it can progress any further. So I think we need to focus on global climate change, and we also need to focus on if we end up having a no-deal Brexit and Scotland can't get back into the EU, we need to focus on making trade deals with other countries because leaving the EU means that a lot of our income will be lost. So we need to focus on just securing our future for not the generation now, but the generation in the future.
I agree. Well done.
Yeah, very well put. You might have a new minister in the making.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm talent spotting already.
And we've got a question.
I was just wanting to add to that by saying, I'm not really sure what to say, but
Would you like to tell us your name and where you're from first?
Yes,
That might help.
I'm Finn Pickin, the postboy for the RYB, and I'm also representing the High School of Dundee while I'm here. And I'm from Caprangis.
And do you agree that climate change is one of the important things we should be focusing on?
Yes, I mean, Brexit's been in the news for 2 years straight now. I mean, you can hardly see any news section on any device without Brexit in it.
Yeah. Getting fed up with it.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think I share that feeling, believe me.
What would you talk about instead if we got rid of Brexit from the news?
I'd say mostly poverty and how we can stop that, and of course global warming and climate change.
I mean, it's really important. You know, in Scotland, obviously we can't escape Brexit because we're affected by it, but we're still trying to do other things. The Scottish Government's got lots of other things going on. Actually, in Westminster, nothing else is happening except Brexit. There is not a single piece of non-Brexit legislation in the UK Parliament. I was just reading this morning, the next Queen's speech has been indefinitely delayed, so everything's ground to a halt, and there's lots of issues that are not being tackled as a result of that, and you know, that is one of the big opportunity costs of everything we're doing just now.
And I know in Scotland there's lots of speculation about the Scottish dimension to the wider constitutional issue, and it's very topical, and there's lots of rumours, as there always is, but especially it seems this week things floating around as things that's going on or might be happening. And one of them is around a second referendum on Scottish independence, and you and your party have been really vocal sometimes. The Brexit vote's been a bit of a game changer in the Scottish dimension. Do you still feel that it's a game changer?
I do. I mean, if you think back some of you will remember 2014 and the independence referendum more clearly than others will, I accept that, but you know, things have changed dramatically since then. It's almost, when you think back to the debates then, it's almost like going back to a different time. You know, the people who argued against independence back then used to say that if we voted for independence, we get thrown out of the European Union. And yet here we are, because we're not independent, we're being taken out of the European Union potentially. So, you know, these pose big questions, and what I believe, I suppose, most fundamentally, is that the future of the country should not be decided by me or Theresa May, it should be decided by the people of Scotland. So if people want to accept Brexit and stay in the UK, that's one thing, but it shouldn't be forced upon us. We should have the ability to choose what the best future for the country is.
And now that you've said that, First Minister, who in here would like a second referendum on the independence of Scotland? There's quite a few hands. And what would you like to say to that, First Minister?
Well, I think, you know, it doesn't surprise me because, well, two things. Did anybody in here get to vote in the first independence referendum? So 1, 2, I bet you didn't. No. Or if you did, we should probably look into that. But nobody born in this century got to vote in that referendum. So, you know, we're talking here about making the voice of young people heard. Surely it's about time young people got more say in the direction of the country. But the second point is this. Young people are the future of Scotland. And, you know, when you hear older people say, oh, Scotland can't be independent, we're too wee, or we're too poor, or we couldn't be trusted, I think young people probably take that, or a lot of young people take that quite personally, because that means that we think you as the next generation can't be trusted. Well, I have got every confidence in the next generation of young Scottish people to make a success of Scotland, whatever future we choose.
Do you feel that Scotland babies England, in that we're always seem to be holding their hand when we vote to stay? They're determined that we come with them. Surely England should just be able to do that on their own if they're so powerful. And if we don't baby them, or if we are babying them, then why are we being told that our voices shouldn't be heard?
It's a good question. And I suppose at the heart of it is one of the issues about how the United Kingdom is structured. You know, the United Kingdom is made up of 4 countries: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. England is by far the biggest. So just arithmetically, and Brexit proved this, if England votes one way, then there is a good chance that no matter how Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland vote, we get outvoted. And that can't be fair or right, particularly on these big issues. Now, if Scotland was independent, we'd still be part of the British Isles. We'd still work really closely with England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but we could do it on the basis of equality, where we all make our own decisions and we work together. But if we differ sometimes, then that's no big deal. We can sort of agree to differ. Instead of the situation just now where England has voted for Brexit, they are entitled to do that. That is, nobody can argue with that. But Scotland kind of has to go along with it, even though we think it's a really, really bad idea. And, it kind of brings into sharp focus that argument for being independent. And then we have the same group of countries in the British Isles, but we're all equal.
We'll take one more comment here, and then we'll move on, I think, to the next question.
So, see how obviously, at the moment we're part of the UK, but the UK's voted to leave, to leave the EU. What are we going to do, or how are you going to deal with the EU laws? Because we'll lose a lot of them, things like human rights and stuff. A lot of them we'll lose. So, how will we deal with that change until we can make our own kind of laws, and what sort of laws could we make?
So if we leave, then most of the existing European laws would be incorporated into our own law. And you might have heard of the Withdrawal Act that the UK Parliament passed, and there was a bit of a stooshy between the Scottish Government and the UK Government over who had responsibility there, but I won't go into all that. And that really means that if we leave, then we incorporate the law as it is, so there shouldn't be any immediate change. Now, that's how it's meant to work. Whether that is how it works in practice remains to be seen. After that, in theory, because who knows what the UK might have to sign up to continue to get trade access, in theory it means the UK can decide its own laws. In practice, I think it would have to abide by most of the European laws if it wanted to sell its goods into the single market. But actually, most of these things are things that, in my view, we should want to have anyway, because people talk about the big bad EU. Most of these are about how we protect workers in the workplace, how we protect the environment, how we protect the quality of the food that we eat, and make sure that goods coming into our country are safe. And these are things that I think we would want to keep doing. And the big danger of, if you listen to people like Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg, who seems to come from the 17th century. Has this been recorded, yeah? They actually see, I think, they see an advantage to being able to reduce protections for workers and for the environment, and then they can market the UK as some kind of low regulation, low tax economy. That's not a future any of us should want, nor should we want a future where we compromise the environment in order to get a trade deal with Donald Trump, where we sell off our National Health Service or whatever. That's the real agenda of Brexit for a lot, not everybody in the Tories, but for a lot of these people, that's the real agenda of Brexit, and we should be really, really wary of that in the future.
Thank you so much, First Minister, and to everybody that asked follow-up questions. Now we have a question from Roger Primary School in Sutherland.
Down in the front.
We are the 5th generation in our family to attend our school. When we are older, we would like to live here and raise our own families.
We love our school because it's got lots of nature and it's very peaceful and safe, and we think that our school is special because of that.
So, what are the Scottish Government going to do to keep people like us in the Highlands so that we can give our own children the same fantastic upbringing that we have had?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what I want. I want to see people able to stay in the rural, beautiful parts of our country, raise families there, and for these to be vibrant areas of our country just as much as Edinburgh or Glasgow is. So there's no single answer to that. Rural schools, for example, we have some protections in place to stop rural schools being closed unless there's really, really good reasons. We're trying to, and I think it's a good thing, goes hand in hand a bit with the climate change argument. We should be encouraging people to see the advantages of living in rural areas, the quality of life that it offers for people, encouraging businesses to locate in areas outside of the central belt. One of the big things we're doing just now, which costs a massive amount of money and it takes a lot of time because it's so complicated, is putting next generation broadband into every single part of the country. So every house, every business premise, no matter where in the country, over the next few years, couple of years, will have broadband, good, super fast broadband. And that means it makes it suddenly possible for somebody to run a business from a remote part of Sutherland that they might not have been able to do before, because they can do it online, they can, sell things online. And so these things start to transform the viability of rural communities. Now, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the things that I think is going to be really important over the next few years, so that your generation do get the chance. You might leave to go to university, but then go back again. And, that's really important, as it is important to make sure we're attracting doctors and nurses and teachers to want to work in these areas so that hospitals and schools are sustainable.
And as you said that, Ms. First Minister, as you know, I'm from a rural area. And as a young person, I don't think I would be able to stay in the Highlands because of the transport costs and the fact that we don't have enough transport. It's so difficult to get around to, like, example, universities. Almost 30% of young people said that the cost of transport stopped them from accessing education.
No, cost of transport is something that, is an issue that we need to think carefully about. When I was saying when I did the interview before coming in here today, one of the things I do every year is have a cabinet meeting with the Youth Parliament and the Children's Parliament, and the cost of transport for young people, bus travel in particular, was one of the things that was raised this year, and we've undertaken to look at that. We invest a lot of money in roads, and that can be controversial sometimes because of climate change arguments. Upgrading roads, we're investing a lot of money in trying to extend, or expand rail services, particularly in rural communities. But doing that and trying to make sure that we keep prices affordable, it's not an easy challenge, but it's certainly something that we've got to, I think, give a lot of thought and consideration to if we're going to do what the girls here are talking about, which is make rural areas sustainable for the future.
Thank you so much, First Minister.
Now, our next question, First Minister, is going to come from Benjamin, and he is 15 from Belmont Academy in South Ayrshire.
Why does our education system have such a broad obligatory curriculum that it has to rely on homework and long school days? For example, if you look at Finland, they have shorter days and no homework, yet some of the best educated in the world.
I wondered how long it would take before the homework question reared its head. I always get mixed opinions in audiences like this about whether homework's a good thing or a bad thing. Firstly, on the point about the length of the school day, as for local councils to decide how the hours we expect young people to spend in education, how that is split up over school days. So in some area, I think in Edinburgh, in fact, young people are not in school on a Friday afternoon. So different councils do it differently. And so if you think your council should be looking at a different school day arrangement, you should perhaps think about speaking to them and making the case there. Curriculum for Excellence is designed to be a very broad-based curriculum so that we're not just filling young people's heads with facts and figures, important though that is, but we're teaching them to be good citizens and good learners and be able to make a big contribution to the world. And homework, well, I'm not sure I can ever give the right answer on homework. It's for teachers to decide the place of homework in the education, and I think young people's voice should be listened to that. We don't want young people to be so overburdened with homework that they can't enjoy life outside of school, but often it has a role to play in just making sure that young people are developing as possible. So that is probably the hardest question I'll get asked all day, the homework one.
Oh, there's some toughies coming, First Minister.
Okay, thanks for that.
Can I ask, back to yourself, do you feel, Benjamin, that it should change? Is that what your question suggests?
I think with my example of Finland, there are other countries that have made a system where it's focused less on trying to cram everything into a day so much that it has to overflow into homework. I think a big part of that question for me was, do you think we should allow students to specialise earlier in their school careers so they can have more time to do what they feel is best for them to do.
So you can get to the bit you enjoy in your education much younger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, people will have different views on that. Curriculum for Excellence, as I say, is intended and designed to be broader based for longer in the education system so that young people can, I guess, try out different things, experience different things and have that kind of broader base of knowledge. Some people will know what they want to do really early in life and so they will always want to kind of stick with that. Most young people, in my experience, probably want to take a bit more time to work out what it is they want to focus on. So again, different people will have different views on this. The last point, just you mentioned Finland, and I'm not going to talk in detail about the Finnish education system, but we have in Scotland what we call an international panel of education advisors, where we draw on the expertise of experts from different countries so that we are opening our eyes and our minds to some of the best things about other countries and also sharing with other countries what we are doing. So if there's good ideas from Finland or elsewhere, we're always open to thinking about them.
Good question. Thank you very much, Benjamin. Now, First Minister, we've got the first of our two quick-fire rounds.
I hate quick-fire rounds.
So I'm going to quickly introduce our quick-fire questions. So we hope the questions are quick and we hope the answers are succinct as well. So question 1 is going to come from Aidan.
Oh no, it's Aidan. His quick-fire questions are really hard.
How many hours sleep do you get each day?
How many hours sleep? Not enough. Probably an average of about 5 or 6 a night, most. That's not. I should be sitting here saying that is not enough for you guys, okay? So you need to get a lot more sleep than that.
So 5 or 6, your answer for that one?
Yeah.
Next question then comes from Divine.
Do you ever use public transport?
Yeah, obviously because of the nature of my job, not as much as I should, and you know, because I'm usually dashing about here, there, and everywhere. But you know, public transport is important. I used to, before I was First Minister, particularly in my constituency, I used to use the buses going round the constituency. So yes, I like travelling by train, although some people will say sometimes they don't like travelling by train because of delays and such like, which is an issue we're working on a lot at the moment.
And now, First Minister, since you mentioned that you used to take the bus, how much is a single ticket?
It depends where you're going.
As in Glasgow, obviously, they have different prices for...
Oh, you're going to catch me out on this. Well, it depends where you're going. I'm going to go about £2 something for a ticket.
What about Edinburgh to Glasgow by train? Loads of people do that every day.
It's over £20.
Oh, painful. But if you've got a young person's rail card, it's cheaper.
See, these
almost,
are trick
you're
questions.
almost in there.
Right, move on.
Next question is what is going to come from Rachel? Almost said that. Rachel, hands up. We're down the front here. And the microphone's coming to you.
What was your first job?
What was your first job?
All right, my very first job was selling tatty scones around the doors in Dreghorn, where I grew up. And I hated it so much that I used to get my dad to do it for me. And then after that, when I was a bit older than that, I worked in a petrol station in Dreghorn, which is still there just now.
So potatoes and petrol.
Potatoes and petrol were yeah. I was terrible at the tatty scone round.
Thank you so much, First Minister. So our next question comes from Kennedy, who's 12, and from the Club Youth Service in Dundee.
Do you think the current rate for free school meals for secondary pupils is an adequate amount for young people to buy a snack and lunch to last all day in school?
We try, obviously we provide free school meals universally for primaries 1 to 3, and then there'll be certain people eligible for free school meals after that, and we want to do as much as we can to tackle holiday hunger. So that's one I'm happy to take away and consider. If, I guess because you're asking me that question, you think it's not, and you know, I'd be happy to go away and consider that and look to see whether there's more that can be done around that.
How do you feel about that answer?
So if And once I've done it, I'm happy to feed back to you. Okay?
And you're thinking about that, you're saying that Child Poverty Action Group, for example, does suggest really clearly there should be around a £5 top-up to child benefit, for example, to help tackle issues surrounding poverty and economic gaps.
Well, we're looking, as you probably know, we have committed in principle to an income supplement for families in poverty. What we are looking at just now is how best to design that to lift the maximum number of children out of poverty. Child Poverty Action Group, which is an organisation I've got huge respect for, argues for what they call the Give Me Five campaign, which is just to add £5 a week to everybody's child benefit. And I suppose the issue with that, and you know the sums tell you this, if we did it that way, about 7 out of every £10 we spent would go to families who are not living in poverty. Now, I'm a great believer in universal benefits because I don't like the stigma attached to means testing, but if you're topping up a universal benefit specifically to target poverty, it raises the question as to whether if you spent that money differently, you could actually lift more children out of poverty. So that's the work we're doing just now, and we've said we'll set out some further steps on that over the next few months.
But some people might argue the policies we have now is seeing child poverty go up in Scotland.
It's welfare cuts that are putting child poverty up, and these are welfare cuts we oppose, but we are nevertheless trying to do what we can. So one of the things we've done since taking partial control, very partial control of the benefit system, is introduce the new Best Start grant, which gives families in poverty money when a child is born, and that's already underway, and we've paid out, I think, something like 4 times the amount of money under that already than was paid out under the old UK system over a longer period of time. And shortly, we'll extend that scheme so that there is also a payment made when a child starts nursery school and also when they start primary school. So we are absolutely looking at ways in which we can tackle child poverty better and lift children out of poverty. But we're doing that just now with one hand tied behind our back, and we're doing it running against the tide of the welfare cuts that are causing a lot of this. So we need to keep also the pressure on to stop these cuts that are driving young people into poverty in the first place.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And now on to our second topical question from Rosa from the FMQT design team.
Puberty is a hard time for everyone, but for many girls it sees them pushed out of sports teams and clubs because they don't feel welcome anymore, and they want to follow the crowd of their friends who are more likely to go shopping or hang out in parks or houses. What is the Scottish Government doing to end girls leaving sports teams and clubs after going through puberty?
Well, I mean, obviously, the government can't force any young person to take up a sport or keep doing a sport. But what we have to do is help to create an environment where young people feel able to be themselves and to do what they want to do without feeling uncomfortable or without undue, overbearing peer pressure leading them down another path. And that's not an easy challenge. Young people are probably under much more pressure today than I was under when I was your age. Social media adds hugely to that kind of pressure. But we've got to, tackle that, and we've got to make sure that young people are supported to do what they want to do. Now, sometimes that will be practical in terms of the support young girls are given to keep up with sport, but sometimes it will just be about encouragement and support to help people feel that they can withstand pressure that are maybe pushing them in directions they don't want to go in.
And as you said, the First Minister, as a young woman in secondary school, the lack of sport clubs for girls, there's hardly any, especially if you live in a rural community. There's always football for boys and other things. There's never really, once you hit, I think, second year, you can't play football in my community at least. And there's no other clubs that it's just for girls or that they feel comfortable going to.
Yeah, and that's a tough nut because, we need to make girls feel that they can come together and have these clubs and support them when they do. And girls should feel that they can play football, they can play rugby, they can do, for goodness sake, women's football now is far more successful in Scotland than men's football, so we want to encourage the next generation there. I'm part of the approach I take in these kind of questions. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to you that I've got the magic solution to issues that are beyond just me as First Minister being able to solve. But we've got to make sure the support's there, the facilities are there for young girls, and that we encourage young girls to do the things that they enjoy and the things that they want to keep up with, rather than feel as if they're under pressure to do things that they don't want to do.
And it's interesting there, during that answer you touched on social media and the pressures that come along with that. And in today's digital generation, that's an issue that lots of people are finding challenging, and there's real opportunities and dangers around that. So we have a question on that very subject, which comes from Olivia, who's 16 and from the MVP Peer Mentoring Programme in Aberdeen. Olivia.
What is the best way to inform younger children about the dangers of social media? For example, what policies could be applied?
Well, I think it's really important, and we're, as all governments are, looking very carefully at all of this just now. So we are thinking about the advice that is given to young people about how to stay safe online, about, screen time and, the sort of healthy amounts of time that you should sit in front of a screen all day. We're about to publish some research that looks specifically at mental health challenges of young girls and the impact and contribution that social media might be playing in that. So there is a role for government to give advice and as much impartial, sensible, practical advice as possible. There's a big role for social media companies themselves in terms of the content that people are able to access and the kind of images that young people might see, or the use of social media as a way to bully young people. Obviously, parents have a big role to play here as well in keeping their young people safe online. Again, these are not easy balances to strike, because the internet, social media, lots and lots of big advantages in all of that for young people, but the risks are definitely there. And I talk to young people, I see it with my own niece and nephews. Social media in particular creates a pressure on young people that wasn't there when I was growing up, and we've got to be very conscious of that, and we've got to make sure that we're responding to that. And it's why events like this are important, because with the best will in the world, although I still think I'm really young, I don't know myself what it's like to be a teenage girl in 2019. I need people like you to tell me that, so that we're understanding the challenges that you face and doing what we can to help you respond to them.
Does that answer that for you, Olivia? I know you work around violence prevention and MVPs about that. Social media is a big part. First Minister spoke about advice there. Is that enough from government, or do you think more needs to be done?
I think more should be done in primary schools, as in spread more awareness of what images can appear and what they should do when they see these images.
No, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, one of the issues that it troubles me a lot is just the, for want of a better expression, the kind of addictive nature of social media. And, I know what it's like where you check Twitter and such like more than you should sometimes. And, what that is potentially doing to how young people's brains are working. So there's big issues in here, and there's a big responsibility for governments, for parents, for schools, but there's a big responsibility for the companies that make millions and billions of pounds out of these platforms, and I'm not sure yet that they are properly taking those responsibilities as seriously as they should be.
And while we're on that topic, have you ever experienced threats and bullying online as a female politician?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I try not to look at it, because I've got quite a large number of followers. I follow a lot of people on Twitter, so all kind of, it's a bit of a ticker tape that goes by really quickly for me. But if I was to go and search, which I don't, and I'm not going to, but if I was to go and search my name on Twitter, it would probably be pretty horrific what came up. And I know all female politicians get a lot of that. Male politicians get it a bit too, but I think there's a particular issue for women in politics or public life, anybody that puts their head above the parapet in any sense. And we've all got to stand against that. Bullies have always been out there, and people who want to hurl abuse have always been out there, but social media gives them access to people that they never had before, and that really is something we have to be very conscious of.
So do you not think on that we have to do more? You spoke about advice, you spoke about parents and our roles and bullying, but social networks are failing to put children's safety at the heart of the money they're making and the businesses they run. And now it's unavoidable that surely government needs to step in to safeguard children's rights.
I'm hugely sympathetic to that. I mean, this is not a sort of get off the hook answer here, but that kind of regulation is not within the power of the Scottish Government. The UK Government are now talking about putting much greater onus on Facebook and Twitter, and that's a good thing. Now, any kind of media regulation raises legitimate questions about free speech and whether government should be regulating a free media. So there are always difficult issues that have to be balanced there. But as you put it, the safety of children and young people is something that is so important that we really do have to take seriously before we get past the point of no return, perhaps, around some of this technology. Now is the time, well, it's probably past time, but now is the time to really be asking and answering these questions.
Thank you very much. And on the social media, thank you for the question. Just to remind people that we do have a social media hashtag for this event, which is hashtag FMQT
Next Generation. So our next question is from Rihanna, who's 19 and is with Action for Children in Western Bartonshire.
I have complex mental health problems and I'm also homeless. The staff who work at the project I live in are not fully equipped to deal with all of the issues I have. Unfortunately, mental health services are too stretched, and so these support staff are viewed as being able to help me to the extent I need it. This is not the case. I had to wait at least 9 hours during the night for someone to come out and see me, and they had to come from the other side of Glasgow. Do you plan to invest more money in mental health support services across Scotland for young people?
Well, thank you for your question. It's a really important question, and your experience is not good enough. So we are already investing more in mental health services overall, but particularly for young people. And we're trying to do a number of things with that investment. Firstly, to have more preventative services for young people. For example, putting counsellors in schools so that young people get help earlier and perhaps then don't need to have access to specialist mental health services. Because a lot of the time just now, young people end up referred to specialist services because the other services are not there, and then waiting times for specialist services get longer. So if we can get more preventative services in place, it also means that we can get quicker access to specialist services for young people who really need those specialist services. So there's a lot of investment and a lot of work going into this right now because mental health is an issue that for more and more people is an issue, and more people need help, and that's a good thing. One of the reasons why there is so much pressure on services these days is there's not as much stigma about mental health as there was when I was growing up. So people feel able to come forward for help, but we have to make sure the services are there when they come forward, and it's the right services in the right place.
See, in the case of when I was younger, so it was noticed from my mum at a young age that I had mental health issues, but I was referred to services after numerous suicidal attempts, and I would be sent to someone and told that I was fine, didn't have anything wrong, and it took till last year at the age of 18 when I had to go to adult services for them to pick up that I had something wrong, and they were unsure why it hadn't been diagnosed. And I spent 3 years in CAMHS for them to tell me in the end that they're not a speaking service and I was to go to counselling. When my mum tried telling them that what I've been diagnosed with now is, my mum tried telling them that when I was maybe 13, 14, and they were telling me I had nothing wrong. So is there a way that you can, I know other people as well that have attended and then been told they're actually fine, and months, years down the line come back a lot worse, and you've kind of got this big period to deal with. Is there a way that you can cut that down and get the people the help they need instead of waiting until they're older?
No, I think that's a really fair point and question. So what government has to do is make sure young people get to services and treatment if that's what they need as quickly as possible. Obviously, it's for clinicians to diagnose and decide, and I'm not a clinician, but I always think, particularly when we're dealing with mental health issues, clinicians, and I'm sure most do, should listen to what a young person or their parents are telling them. Sometimes, they will reach a different diagnosis and think that that's not the case, but but hearing the voice of a young person or their parent, and not just dismissing something that they think might be wrong. So getting young people to the right services as quickly as possible is crucial, and then of course making sure that their voice is heard. And as I said a moment ago, doing as much as early as possible. Prevention and early intervention, whether it's physical health or mental health, is really, really important. And on mental health, we still don't do enough of that, and we don't do it well enough.
See, just on a final note, do you think that that the whole of Scotland could add in a kind of generic that all support staff need to have a basic mental health training just across Scotland? Anyone supporting young people, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something we should be aspiring to. I talked a moment ago about the investment we're making to put more counsellors into schools. We're also looking at the training, basic mental health training that teachers have access to. And, for any person working with a young person, being mental health aware is really important. So I think you're absolutely right to raise the issue of training, and, I'll feedback your point to both the Education Secretary and the Health Secretary about what more we can do as we take forward these plans to make sure that there is greater awareness.
I think child mental health waiting times are at a record high, and people are waiting such a long time, and one part of that is more people can come forward. It's not a new issue. I'm 31, but if I go back to my mid and early teens and right throughout, I've suffered mental health my whole life, and I've had to find out the hard way, and that's why I campaign now that growing up in poverty in the family that I had and the issues that left on me, self-harm was never the answer to any of the questions in my life. And to get that message out, and government's put a lot of focus, and there's a task force and funding, and what more as a society do we need to do to make young people feel loved and supported, rather than standing up and saying, I was told there's nothing wrong with me and to get back to life?
Well, making sure the health service is responding as you would want it to respond is an important part of the responsibility of government. And as I say, it's one we take very, very seriously, and there are improvements we need to make. You said earlier on about waiting times at a record high. The number of young people being seen is going up. The number of people working in CAMHS is going up. But the demand is growing as well. So that's one of the things we need to make sure we deal with properly. But the point you're making is fundamental, because it's not just an issue for our health service. We need to, as a society, be much more understanding of mental health. We need to, as I've said a couple of times now, do much more to prevent problems getting worse. Young people need support if they're dealing with difficulties in their lives, to be more resilient and to be able to cope with those difficulties. So there's a whole range of things that we need to do as a society, not just as a government. And I mean, you talked about being 31, which I can't believe, but I'm a lot older than that. And I suppose one note of optimism, when I was at school, which is not yesterday, nobody ever talked about mental health. And if anybody had talked about mental health, the stigma attached to that would have been immense. So we have come a long way, and that's a good thing, but we need to make sure we continue along this road.
Yeah.
Thank you, First Minister. Now we have our second round of quickfire questions. Are you ready?
Not really, no. I'm rubbish, as you've probably noticed, at quickfire questions.
So firstly, over to Eloise.
What's your favourite TV programme?
Oh, what's my favourite? I don't watch a lot of TV, but the ones I do, I like soap operas. So I quite like Coronation Street. And I like River City, which is Scottish soap opera. So those are probably the ones that I would tend to switch on, just to switch off my brain a little bit. Switch on the telly to switch off my brain.
Thank you. Next we have Eleanor.
Who is your favourite Scottish artist or musician?
Can only pick one.
Scottish classical musician. Right.
Artist or musician.
Right. Nicola Benedetti.
A good choice. And our final quickfire is Rosa.
What is your main source of inspiration in your work as First Minister?
You're going to think my answer to this is a typical politician's answer because I'm sitting in front of all of you. But young people are the greatest inspiration I get as First Minister, because I get to see the world through your eyes when I'm sitting having discussions like this. You keep me on my toes, but you also just tell me how much there is to be proud of in Scotland and how much amazing talent we have right across the country. So if ever I'm feeling a bit down or overburdened by some of the stresses and strains of the job, you know, a chat with a group of young people will always lift me out of that, because there's nothing wrong with Scotland that the brains and the talent and the creativity of our young people can't fix. That was a quite sooky answer.
Do you think you're getting buttered up to a bit? That's very good. Well, our next question, in terms of nothing wrong with Scotland and brains and talent and confidence and passion, we've got a question to come from Ethan, who's 20, and from LGBT Youth Scotland. Ethan.
Can the First Minister lay out a timeline for the Gender Recognition Act from here forward and recommit your government to supporting trans rights by taking action on this vital issue?
We are committed to the Gender Recognition Act, and we've done a consultation. We are still looking at the responses to that consultation, and we'll shortly set out the next steps on that. I mean, this is an issue that has become too polarised in Scotland, if I'm going to be very frank about it. And as First Minister, I've got a big responsibility to try to depolarise it. My views on this are hugely influenced by the young trans people that I have met and had the privilege of meeting and speaking to, and getting an understanding of the barriers and the difficulties that young trans people often have just to be accepted for who they are. And I want Scotland to be a country where everybody feels safe and secure and accepted for who they are. And that is what makes me a trans ally, and I always will be. I'm also a feminist. I've been a feminist since as long back as I can remember. So some of the concerns that are being raised, we can't just sweep under the carpet. We've got to listen to and address, and I'm determined to do that. But there is no place in Scotland, and we shouldn't accuse people raising concerns of being transphobic automatically, but we all have to recognise there is a lot of transphobia in Scotland. We're not unique in that sense, and just as we would all say that homophobia is not acceptable and any form of discrimination is unacceptable, we have to be absolutely clear that there is no place in Scotland for transphobia as well. So I hope that we can lead this debate over the period to come in a way that listens to people's views and concerns, but ends up in a place where everybody in Scotland feels that they belong and they are safe and secure. That's the most important thing.
So could you give the young trans people of Scotland reassurance that the government will commit to delivering the 3 key asks that the gender recognition set out, which was legal recognition of non-binary people, self-declaration without the requirement for psychiatric diagnosis, and lowering the age of gender recognition to the age of 16.
These are the issues we've been consulting on, and I've given commitments around these things. I want the process of gender recognition to be much easier. I mean, the issues around psychiatric assessment, the length of time it takes. When I talked earlier on about the conversations and the meetings I've had with young trans people, these are often the issues that cause, not the only issues, but these are often the issues that cause the trauma and the difficulties, and we want that process to be as pain and stress-free and bureaucracy-free as possible. Now, these are the issues. I'm not backtracking in any of that. These are the issues we've been consulting about, and we have to go through this process. And it's taken longer, I think, than a lot of people would have wanted it to take. And that's partly because of some of the issues and the tensions in this debate. And I want to move forward in a way that, the last thing I want to do is move forward in a way that makes trans people feel even more under pressure. When I listen to, and I am a woman, obviously, I'm a feminist, when I listen to a lot of the concerns, and I'm not oversimplifying this, there's a whole range of views that are being expressed just now. A lot of the concerns that are expressed from a feminist or a female point of view are not actually, when you strip it all back, they're not concerns about trans women. They're concerns about men who abuse women, and that's not a new problem for society either. We've got to tackle men, which again is a minority, who would abuse women, but we do that without making life harder for trans people is what I want to achieve. And I would say to the trans community generally, I hope I am always somebody that you see as being an ally to your right to be who you are. Sometimes we confront difficult debates, sometimes we confront debates where there is a lot of heated argument, and as First Minister I've got a job to do to try to lead a way through that where everybody feels that they're listened to, their concerns are being heard. But to go back to my fundamental point, that this is a country where whether you're gay, straight, trans, non-binary, you feel as if you're safe, you're secure, and you can be who you are.
So in terms of timetable, that, and I know there's a question in from Ethan about timetable, and you felt the consultations went on a bit, and maybe a bit different from what you'd hoped or expected, but you feel the conversation matters. Do you feel then that the pledge to reform the current Gender Recognition Act by 2021 is still on target?
That is still our commitment. Obviously, when you, and I know there is a frustration that this has taken longer. Often with issues like this, it is better to take longer if you can address some of the issues in the process. And that's what I would rather do than not address those issues and have a process that is that doesn't take us where we want to go. So that's why we are taking a bit of time on this. But the commitments, I made these commitments, as did every party leader, not just me, in advance of the last Scottish election. We all made those commitments, and it's important that those commitments are taken forward, but we try to take them forward in the right way, and that's what I'm committed to doing.
And we probably can't ignore the elephant that might be in some people's minds is around the media coverage recently around Twitter group chats and splits inside the party as well as Parliament and the wider conversation. Do you find that a hard thing to try and deal with? You spoke about trying to bring people together as First Minister, feminist and a trans ally. Do you find that hard to try and deal with the various internal voices in your own party and government?
Look, that's part of leadership. You have to deal with issues where you face different opinions and sometimes intensely divided opinions, not just on this issue, but in a whole range of issues. But the role of leadership ultimately is to lead, and to lead having listened to and made decisions. The SNP is in government, so we are, this is not a complaint, long may it continue as far as I'm concerned, but it often means we're the focus of a lot of the scrutiny around this. But I suspect within every party right now, there are some of these same debates taking place. So we need to make sure that we're doing that respectfully, but in a way, as I go back to a point that I suppose I can't overstate the impact on me, because I'm not just coming at this academically. The conversations I've had with young trans people in particular have had a huge impact on me over, all my time as First Minister and before that. And, that is very important to me, that we get it right. And that's what I'm determined we try to do.
Great, and hopefully that adds some really clear championing and support back from the First Minister. We're going to move on to our next question, which comes from Sam, from Chas. I like the t-shirt, we know what organisation you're from.
There's not nearly enough disabled toilets in changing areas in Scotland. How will this improve?
Well, that's a great question. We need to, as we build, as we refurbish buildings, as we design the country of the future, we need to, much more than has ever been done in the past, make sure we are building in disabled access. And we need to, where it's not there, organise it. This won't all be down to government, often private organisations or other bits of the public service. It's a very different debate to the one we've just been having about the trans issue. But, and I don't want to sound overly simplistic here, but at the end of the day, sometimes the most important things are quite simple. Scotland, if it's to be anything, should be a country where everybody has equal access and equal ability to fulfil the potential. And if there are barriers, whether it's in terms of disabled access or whatever it is, we might not be able always to do it overnight, but as a society, we should be absolutely determined that we are removing those barriers, because if we don't, we won't live up to that ideal of being a genuinely equal country.
And it's funny listening to a head of a government speak about disability rights, trans rights, the role of Twitter, leadership on the world stage. And it's been announced recently that we've got another world leader coming to the UK shores in June, Donald Trump, the President of the USA. And just as we think about, some of his language, it's been quite disparaging about trans people, about disability rights organisations. I remember a few years ago, or whatever it was, Gary Tank Commander said to you, Donald Trump, dingy or no dingy. So my
I
question
saw that
is,
clip not that long ago, actually. It came up in one of my feeds.
and so my question now, First Minister, is Donald Trump times take two, dingy still, bigger dingy or a weird dingy?
I think if it was me, Nicola Sturgeon, just, ordinary citizen, it would definitely be dingy. I've said, Gary Tank Commander, I love him, but it's not the most serious of interviews you ever do, okay? So you're being a bit light-hearted. As First Minister, I'm not going to refuse to meet the President of the United States, should that arise. It hasn't arisen so far, but I'm not going to do that. If I'd got to meet the President of the United States, I wouldn't hold back from telling him where I disagreed. I'm sure he wouldn't hold back from telling me where he disagreed with me. Do you want to come and listen to the discussion? So, that's the kind of approach I would take. I disagree passionately with not just so much of what Donald Trump believes in, but so much of the way he is going about being president. He has such a leadership response. I feel there's not a day that passes that I don't acutely, whether it's on the trans issue or any of the other issues we talk about, aside from the detail of these issues, I feel acutely my responsibility to set the right tone in debates, to lead in the right way. And he has got that times 100 given the scale of the United States and its place in the world. And I think he fails so often to lead in the right way and in the right tone. And it's something that is troubling in terms of the state of the world at the moment.
So you won't be requesting to meet him when he's here?
I'm not saying I'd be requesting to meet him. I wouldn't
so
go that
you didn't say no,
far.
but you didn't ask either?
Something like that, yeah.
Right, okay. Thank you very much.
So we'll probably, yeah.
So it's still a kind of dingy, sort of dingy.
A sort of dingy. I'm not sure you can sort of dingy somebody. You can.
You either dingy or you dingy.
I mean, you either dingy or you dingy.
That's clear now. Thank you for that. We did well. We'll blame Gary Tank Commander for that one.
Okay, thank you now. So now on to our another big policy issue with a question from Leon, who's 13 and from WE High School in Dumfries and Galloway.
What are your thoughts on how it can be argued that NHS resourcing and bedding are being misused by people who are in hospital as a direct result of certain life choices and decisions they have made personally made?
Well, I don't think the NHS can be judgmental. I think the NHS, it's a universal health service. It should be there for people when they need it. And I think we would start down a very dangerous path if we said, well, you don't deserve healthcare because of the choices that you have made. And I don't think that is what anybody would want to see the health service do or how they would want to see it operate. That said, we do all have to take more responsibility for how we live our lives. Government has to make sure people have the right information because lots of the health conditions, not all health conditions, and some health conditions that are associated with smoking, for example, people can get them even if they don't smoke. So, but we can all, not smoke, not drink irresponsibly, try to eat healthily, try to exercise. We can all take a bit more responsibility for how we live our lives, and over time that will help reduce the burden on the health service. But I would never feel comfortable with the health service being able to pick and choose who that it was able to treat when somebody needed treatment.
How do you feel about that answer?
Yeah, pretty good.
Do you think people should take more responsibility?
I was more focusing on like alcohol and stuff, that sort of route. But yeah.
Okay. I mean, these things are complicated. We should. And the Scottish Government's done a lot here, the minimum unit pricing for alcohol, for example, not popular with everybody, but that's all about trying to reduce alcohol abuse and irresponsible consumption of alcohol. But of course, with things like alcohol, and you are also dealing often with people who have addictions, and you have to support people and help people to deal with addictions. So these things are not always absolutely clear cut. The health service should be there to give healthcare to people who need it, but as a society, we've all, as I say, got to do more to be more healthy.
Okay, thank you, First Minister. Now on to our next question from Stephen.
Hi, First Minister.
Social security in Scotland has been challenging and stressful for disabled people. What are the Scottish Government doing to make it less stressful and more respectful for disabled people?
Well, thanks for that question. I think the way in which social security, the system of social security UK-wide, has often demonised and stigmatised and made life very difficult for disabled people is awful. And we are, as you probably know, we are in the process of taking control of some aspects of the social security system. Not enough, but some, and that's a process that's underway right now. We've already established a new social security agency, Social Security Scotland, and we have, from the word go, been determined to build dignity and respect into every aspect of its operation. So that means, for example, having more face-to-face assessments, not having disabled people having to justify themselves time and time again, not having the kind of punitive sanctions approach in the system. Social security, in my view, is part of the fundamental safety net of any civilised society. We shouldn't treat people on social security as if they're somehow scroungers or not entitled. It's part of the rights we have in any decent society, and the system we're building tries to build that in and embed that at every single stage.
And Stephen, you're from RNIB, aren't you? So it's an organisation that deals with these issues quite a lot. And I know there's a lot of young people in RNIB that are very active. Do you feel that you recognise some of that answer and some of your experiences in your organisations?
Yeah, absolutely. I see this all, not just in Scotland, across the UK. People with disabilities find it very difficult to fit into society because of the challenges in society, and we feel that things like the universal credit are not helping people with disabilities, and in fact it's driven people into severe poverty and even, in worst case scenario, suicide. So we just feel that it could be more respectful and a lot more less stressful for young people.
No, I 100% agree with that, and I hope as we take over the benefits that we are going to be responsible for, that respect and dignity is very much part of the system.
Thank you for that. We now have 10 minutes where we have no scripted questions. So we're going to open it to the floor. So show of hands, either a point that the First Minister has mentioned that you want to ask a further up question on, or a new topic that hasn't been touched. So hands right in there, and here we all go. We're not going to get everybody, but what I'll do is take it in twos. If you say your name and where you're from, and we'll get as many people who's not spoken. So if you have spoken or asked a question, we ask not to put your hand up, and people have not had a chance. So we'll come right down the front here, and we'll take the chap here with the curly blonde hair, and then the person behind them sitting on the seat. So do you want to tell us your name and how old you are?
I'm Ollie and I'm 9.
Hi Ollie, and what's your question?
What was your biggest challenge from becoming First Minister?
And we'll take the person behind you as well, here.
I'm Hazel and I'm 9. Is there any way you can ban plastic and paper straws and just get people to use reusable straws?
Yep.
Biggest challenge and cutlery.
The biggest challenge when you become First Minister is you quickly realise you're kind of responsible for everything. So before, when I used to be the Health Minister, which is a big job, responsible for the health service, and that's hard, but then you become First Minister and you're responsible for the health service, the education system, the transport system, all of the responsibilities of the Scottish Government, and learning to deal with that and make sure you're delegating to other people properly, but you're across everything can be quite hard, and probably more challenging than most politicians care to admit. And on straws, yes, we want to take away plastic straws and not have plastic straws used. There are some disabled groups, of course, who would point out the need of some disabled people to use straws. So again, that is a reminder that we've got to listen to different voices. But there are alternatives, not to every use of plastic, but there are alternatives to most uses of plastic, particularly these single-use plastic items. And if we really care for the environment and protecting our oceans and wildlife, then we need to get much more serious about reducing the impact that we as human beings have on it.
Good. Next two questions. We'll take this person here, and then we'll come to the person on the end.
Hi. Waiting times at hospitals, is there any plans for to cut the waiting times and stuff down?
And what's your name and how old are you?
Oh, Leah, and I'm 14.
Have to know the information. Thank you very much, Leah. And yourself?
I'm Ivana and I'm 16, and I was wondering what you think about disabilities that aren't visible. For example, like I know like myself and lots of my friends have had trouble trying to get our teachers to understand that, you know, sometimes we need out of class or we just need a bit of time. And also I think there's a lot of judgment. For example, like if you have a disabled card but you're not in a wheelchair, you're immediately like, to anybody else, you're not disabled. But, you know, not all of them are as visible as the others.
So non-visible disabilities and waiting times.
The answer to the question on waiting times is yes. We are investing large sums of money to reduce waiting times in our hospitals. Similar to the discussion we had a wee while ago about mental health, our people are living longer, the population is ageing, that's a great thing, but it is resulting in many more demands in the health service, and we need to make sure we're investing in our health service to deal with that. And the Health Secretary is very focused on the investments we need to make sure that the health service can treat people within the waiting times that are set. Hidden disabilities or less visible disabilities, that's something that is raised with me quite often actually, and again, part of this is about our awareness and our understanding as a society. None of us know everything, and none of us are aware of all the different conditions and challenges that people go through, but we can all try to be more aware and more understanding and to listen to what people are telling us and not to judge people. You know, we're all different, we're all individuals, we all have our own challenges and, you know, hiccups in life, and we've got to learn to be a bit kinder to each other and a bit more understanding. In addition to that, there are a number of actual conditions that we need to make sure we are raising awareness of so that people are much more understanding of the specifics and what to look for and how then best to support people.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Next two questions. We'll take the person on the end here and then this gentleman here, yeah.
I'm Tamsin and I'm 12, and I was wondering, with the major financial cuts that are being made to most council areas and most of it happening in education, what impact do you think this is going to have on young people's education?
Thank you very much.
I'm Marcus and I'm 14 from Dundee, and you spoke about peer pressure and like obviously looking at social media. What would you as the First Minister say to people that were struggling with peer pressure and the pressures of social media?
Council cuts and peer pressure.
The first thing I would say on the issue of education and council spending, I don't for a minute deny that life is tough out there for councils and for the health service and for schools. We've gone through we're still in it, a long period of austerity where the government at Westminster has been cutting the budget of the Scottish Government, and that's been very difficult. But we have, and you know, some of the decisions that the Scottish Government have made, some people will think they're not the right decisions. So I'm not saying we're perfect or we don't have room for improvement. We always do. But we've tried really hard to protect budgets that matter most to people. So the health service, we've increased the amount of money that has been spent on the health service. In the last few years, spending on councils has actually increased. So in the most recent budget, the money councils have to spend is higher than it was last year, not lower. The education budgets, the money councils have been spending on schools has also been going up in the last couple of years as well. That doesn't mean that there's no problems or that schools don't find it difficult. We've also set up, you might have heard of the Pupil Equity Fund, where we're investing more money specifically to help schools in deprived areas or where there is young people from deprived communities, so that we are trying to make sure that there's the right support there. So none of these things are easy. But the job of government is to try to make the decisions that protect the things that keep people care most about, and that's what we will always try to do. But as we make those decisions, it's really important that we listen to what young people and others say to us. And you know, there's no doubting that for young people and for the future of the country, the quality of the education system has got to be the most important thing we think about, and that will always be the case. Peer pressure and social media. I mean, I kind of think back to when I was young, which is not easy with every year that passes, but you know, you hear adults saying things to you and you think, oh, you know, yeah, you don't understand. So I'm always a bit cautious as I'm about to sort of give young people advice about how to withstand peer pressure, because you never think, and sometimes with justification, that people of my age really understand what it's like to be your age. But I suppose the advice I always try to give to young people, and it's based on my own experience. I was, believe it or not, people look at me as First Minister and say, how can this be true? I was a really shy young person. I didn't have a lot of confidence when I was at school. And the most important advice I got, and the most important advice I can ever give young people, is just try to believe in yourself. You know, you're better and more able and more brilliant than you will ever give yourself credit for. So believe in yourself, and don't let anybody, if you've got a big dream that you want to achieve in life, no matter how ridiculous somebody else might think it is, don't let them put you off. Follow your dreams and follow your heart and be yourself. Whoever that is be yourself and believe in yourself, and don't let people bring you down. And at different stages in your life, you will find that harder to follow, that harder advice to follow than at others. But every time you're finding it tough, just remember you're brilliant and you're capable and you're able, and don't ever let anybody tell you you're not.
And what a brilliantly inspiring note to pause and stop our questions there on from the First Minister.
Now, that is all we have time for on this edition of First Minister Question Time.
Next Generation.
But you two are good at that. Do it again. Do it once more.
Okay, First Minister Question Time.
Next Generation.